Hey everyone, I'm Dennis, and when I turned 18, I went through 9 months of chemotherapy and multiple surgeries in order to treat my cancer. This is my journey of how I was able to cope with having cancer and what it's like to be a teenage cancer patient. I'll be talking about the negative side effects of chemotherapy and the struggles of recovering from a tumor removal surgery. But I'll also be talking about how I was able to live my life during this time. One set of cancer patients that you don't hear very often is the positives. Obviously, the negatives vastly outweigh the positives, but I still think it's worth it to acknowledge the positives and to find the good in a terrible situation. For those of you who have cancer or know someone who does, hopefully this can be an inspiration to help you through some of the unknowns. Without further ado, let's get into it. I began chemotherapy right after my 18th birthday. This is what a standard hospital room looks like where I was admitted to receive chemotherapy. That's me in the reclining bed in the pink shirt, and to the left of me, you can see the infusion machines that control how fast the IV fluid bags and the chemotherapy drugs are infused into my body. Just to the right of me was the bathroom and the shower, and to the bottom right was the nurse's workstation, where they would record everything on my medical record, like when they administered a chemotherapy drug or documented my vitals. My treatment plan revolved around a 4 to 5 week cycle. The first 2 weeks, I received 2 chemotherapy drugs, cisplatin and doxorubicin. I would be admitted to the hospital and would receive lots of IV fluids to avoid damaging my kidneys. And then I would get the chemotherapy infused over the next several hours. I would then be monitored constantly for the next several days, making sure that my vitals and my kidneys were all functioning correctly. And I would be able to be discharged as long as my kidneys were functioning at the appropriate level. Following the cisplatin and doxorubicin, I would get high-dose methotrexate. For this, I was also admitted to the hospital and I would also receive a lot of IV fluids. But for this chemo, I could be discharged in as few as 2 to 3 days, and the side effects weren't as bad. Then I would receive maybe half a week to a week of recovery time before starting that cycle all over again. My first treatment was in December, and that was the biggest shock to my body. It was also the only time that I threw up, just a little bit, because I made the mistake of trying to eat food right after chemotherapy. Especially the first day or two after chemotherapy, I would feel super weak, both physically and mentally. It was super hard to concentrate and to motivate myself to do anything besides sleep, eat, and watch mindless TV or movies. A few days after receiving chemo, I would slowly start to regain my energy. I'd be able to start playing some video games and maybe watch some more complicated movies or TV shows. After a week or so, I definitely would start feeling a lot better. I could start doing things like my college applications or reading, and if my immune system was good enough, which was determined by my white blood cell count, I could even go hang out with friends or live a somewhat normal life. After the first full cycle, my hair began to fall out in small patches. And it was super annoying because it would get itchy and the hair would get everywhere. So I decided to shave my head by January 2015, before I started my second cycle of chemo. And after 2 cycles of chemotherapy, it was time to do my tumor removal surgery. Quick warning that some of these pictures have stitches and a little bit of dried blood. The tumor was sitting right above my right knee, which means in order to remove it properly, they had to cut from the middle of my femur all the way down to right below my knee. They would then cut through my femur, remove that part of the bone, and also remove my entire knee joint because it was too close to the tumor and it could potentially have infected cancer cells. You can see here that the metal rod is sort of inserted into my femur bone and it has a solid connection there, and then it's connected to a metal knee joint. They also had to shave off the top of my tibia so that they could connect it to my knee joint. Fortunately, the surgery was a success and they were able to remove the tumor completely and see that the tumor had shrunk, which means that it was responding to the chemotherapy. Right after the surgery, I could barely move at all. I could only walk with heavy support with people around me and or things like a walker or crutches. I also had significant leg pain over the next couple weeks. Because if you imagine just someone cutting open your leg and doing all sorts of stuff to the bone inside, it was super painful, and I definitely had to take an occasional pain medication. And it would be a long journey before I regained the normal use of my leg. I'm super thankful for my physical therapist because she helped me throughout this long journey of recovering the normal use of my leg. She helped me with all sorts of different exercises to help me strengthen my leg and to regain the range of motion. She was super good at pushing me just enough so that I felt like I was making substantial progress, but I was also comfortable. Here are some of the highlights of the leg exercises I did while I was still recovering from surgery. I was given a couple weeks of reprieve from chemotherapy after the surgery so that my body could recover. But pretty soon after, I was thrown right back into thick of things and I had to restart chemotherapy. Even though the tumor was removed, this was done in order to kill any floating cancer cells that were still in my body, because research has found that if we don't do the second round of chemotherapy, there's a much larger chance of the cancer coming back. This time where I restarted the chemotherapy right after the surgery was definitely the most difficult time for me. My body was still recovering from the surgery, and to add on top of that the super poisonous effects of chemotherapy, it was just super rough. I was doubly fatigued, I was in pain from my leg, and I definitely had to lean a ton on my support network at this point. You know, it would take a monumental effort to just swing my legs over the bed, and I would oftentimes need help just doing simple tasks like going to the bathroom. But after the next couple chemo cycles, I was able to get a lot more used to the chemotherapy, and I also was recovering from the surgery. So things definitely got a lot better in the coming months. I got into a rhythm and I was able to be discharged in the shortest amount of time possible for each of the chemotherapies. My tips for achieving this are to drink plenty of water before receiving chemo, during chemotherapy, and after chemotherapy. Basically, just make sure to be hydrated. It also helps a lot to stay in good physical shape. I was able to do a lot of exercises when I was away from the hospital. Things like pull-ups, leg exercises, and even swimming. Here's an example of myself doing some pull-ups.
1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And here's an example of me doing some swimming for some cardio. In the last couple months of my chemotherapy, I definitely got used to the routine. I didn't even have to be admitted for half of my chemos, which meant that I could just go to the hospital, spend a couple hours in a hospital room getting the chemotherapy infused, and then leave and go back home the same day. During this time, my leg recovery was going great. At this point, I was just using one crutch or a cane, and I was even able to drive myself and do things like hang out with friends or go to the gym. As long as my white blood cell count was high enough, at sometimes I just felt like a normal kid. The chemotherapy also didn't make me feel as nauseated or as fatigued, and I recovered a lot faster from the after effects. So for those of you folks who are going through chemotherapy now, just know that it does get better. In early July, I got my last dose of chemotherapy and I had my last surgery to remove my portacath. And after a bone scan and a CT scan, I was declared officially cancer-free. I am now almost 6 years cancer-free from my last day of chemotherapy. I couldn't have gone through this without the awesome support of my family, friends, and hospital care team. Hopefully this is inspiring to those folks who are going through cancer now. Please, please, please stay strong and don't be afraid to lean on your support network and ask for help. If you want to hear my story about how I was diagnosed with cancer, I've already made a video on that. Otherwise, I'll be making a video on my life after cancer, so subscribe and look out for that. Thanks for watching everyone. Stay strong and stay healthy.